Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody to Management 3074. And today we have a special guest presenter. I'm going to read my bio if I could find it on one of my screens. So hold on. I'm very excited. He spoke to many of my students' previous classes, and I'm just happy to have him here today. So let me pull up the bio. Okay. Oh, okay. So Mr. Koss is the principal KC Social Impact Lab, and his biography is such. He is a global sustainability and social impact leader with more than 3 decades of experience at the intersection of private sector, governments, and international institutions. He is the principal and co-founder of KC Social Impact Lab, and where he advises organizations on social responsibility strategies and global media development for impact. Prior to founding the lab, he is nearly 25 years. Oh, can y'all hear me okay? Okay. All right, let me finish. Okay, so let me go back to that. Okay. Prior to founding the lab, he has nearly 25 years of American Development Bank experience where he developed large-scale programs and cross sector partnerships spanning both public and private stakeholders throughout Americas. He is the founder of Many Hats Institute, a 501(c)(3) nonprofit dedicated to improving the conditions of children and youth worldwide, and serves as a brain trust member for XPRIZE. His work brings a systems level perspective to sustainability grounded in practice and focus on long-term measurable outcomes. And that was a lot. Did I cover everything? Because I know you've done a lot.
Yeah, you covered the gist of it. I'm also an adjunct professor like Atiba
Yes,
at the
yes,
business school at the American University at Kogod, where I
yes.
teach global sustainability strategies, business ethics, and fundamentals of international business. So it's great to be here with my friend Atiba and hopefully my new friends in the class, which is really exciting.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you, and students always learn so much from you. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity to host you here at Virginia Tech. So, oh yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so I guess I want to start first with how did you just tell us a little bit about you that we maybe I didn't mention, or just tell us how you got into the field of social entrepreneurship, social
Sure.
impact.
Well, it was by accident,
Yeah,
actually.
it
Um,
always is.
I'm Fabian Koss. It's a pleasure to be with everybody. I'm originally from Argentina, and it is a World Cup year, so we're the defending World Cup champions of what I call football, which is known as the United States as soccer. And I did the bulk of my career at the Inter-American Development Bank, which is owned by 48 countries, and the clients are the actual owners of the bank. The United States government is the single largest shareholder of the IDB, so our corporate headquarters is in Washington, D.C. And the only real qualification I had to join the bank at that time in 1994 was my age, because I was under 30 years old. And I met the president of the Inter-American Development Bank at a really fundamental, important time in our history. That's because in 1994, over 70% of the world's population was under 30 years of age. So it was a young region. And in Latin America, it was as high as 80% in some countries. So the Latin American governments were the beneficiaries or the receiving partners of the large loans for these development projects that really had to address young people and the issues affecting young people. We had to come up with an idea in 1994, mind you, before the internet was popular, to reach the young leaders of the region, to bring them together, to convene them, to find out from themselves, from you guys as young leaders, what are the world's addressing, what are the problems and challenges that you're facing. So my life changed there because we received 5,000 applications, and mind you, this was before the internet, and the fax machine was almost breaking because they were all coming in via fax through our office, of young leaders ages 18 to 25 who were making a difference in their communities. And they represented They represented students, scientists, musicians, artists, indigenous leaders, rural leaders, agricultural leaders, um, all philosophical leaders, leaders from all walks of life, which is what we really wanted to tap into. And they had such an impact on the board of governors, which are the secretary of the treasury and these big government officials. And it's important because I'm going to be talking about public-private partnerships. So it couldn't end with just a meeting. So the governors of the bank said, it can't end with just you guys coming here and giving us a report. But we would like you to come back to select amongst yourselves 20 people, 20 young leaders that'll be paid for and will be all expense paid, and we'll pay you to come to the bank headquarters and develop a program with us. So that's when my life changed, because then the president of the bank said, okay, Fabian, you're going to put this thing together and you're going to run it. And I was hired to put together a conference, not basically run a program. So that's how I got into it. And I always say we tapped into an incredible resource. I always say a gold mine, because we received thousands and thousands of applications from young leaders, not just with ideas, but that were making a big difference. And you know what? This was 1994, 95, and we selected them right, because two of them became presidents, heads of state. They became captains of industry, scientists, agricultural leaders, and we're still in contact with these young leaders. So that's how I got involved in this intergovernmental agency business. I can't hear you, T, but I think you're on mute.
How hard is it to make partnerships, like to find the right partners for projects? I mean, you do so many projects, but how do you know when it's the right partner?
It's super challenging. It's super challenging because I represented governments. I represented not just one country, but 48 countries. So
Mhm.
there's organizations like mine, like the World Bank, like the United Nations. So imagine we're run by all these governments, and the government speed is different than a company's speed. And a company's from the private sector speed is different than an NGO or a foundation or a non-governmental organization speed. Because we're very bureaucratic coming from the public sector, and we're very slow. And in the private sector, time is money. I didn't invent that. So they're efficient, they're fast, they're speedy. They need things done, and we take a slow process. So that marriage between finding times, and then another thing is passions, and you have to identify what's the right partner and what's for the right type of project. And I'm going to talk about an interesting project that was a really fascinating one, I think so, that I came across. We had to come up with a workforce development program for Latin American young leaders and youth that were youth at risk that needed to be trained and to enter the workforce. Because over 65% of the kids in Latin America weren't finishing high school, much less going into college. So we needed to prepare these young people for work, to get jobs. And if you're a young person and you're not motivated to finish school, and I'm generalizing, and sometimes you have to generalize because we're talking about millions and millions of people, we can't attract these young leaders to bring, how do we bring them back into education and then give them workforce development skills, or what we call life skills, to prepare them for the work world? So we came up with this idea, and it wasn't mine. The Minister of Sport of Brazil at the time came to me and said, Fabian, we've got to use a passion that will call these young people. And that Minister of Sport was a gentleman by the name of Pele. I don't know if you guys have heard of Pele, but Pele was one of the world's best soccer players in the world, and from Brazil at the time. And he said, soccer it's a global thing. It attracts people from all walks of life. All you need is a ball, and if you don't have a ball, you can use a mop or a rag, and you learn things. You learn, and it's an attraction. So we said, okay, let's develop. How do we get to develop a program, a workforce development program around sports? And then I said, well, we'll go to the board, and I'll go with you, Pele, and you'll help me, and we're going to raise money to do a pilot program. You guys, I'm sure, have learned about what a pilot program is, like a test. We're going to test this out. So we got $17 million, which is not a lot of money to test a pilot program when you're talking about 48 countries, to come up with a project using soccer as a tool. And then the board of directors, which are the representatives of all these governments, they almost kicked me out of the boardroom. They say, what? We're not in the sports business. We're using taxpayers' money. How can we use our own taxpayers' money? We need education projects. We need infrastructure projects. We need to build schools. We need to build, and but well, why are we getting into the sports business? And I had to explain to them, we're not getting into sports business. We're using sports as the attraction, as the hook, and we're using the lessons learned from working in team sports to prepare them for the workforce. So what do we call these lessons learned? We call them life skills. And these are things that we don't even think about that we learn through sports and especially team sports. Communication. What we did was we interviewed all these CEOs of top Fortune 500 companies and said, what do you guys need? What is the perfect, or what do you need to prepare your workforce for, how are you happy as employers? And the CEOs would always tell us, you know what, Fabian, we know how to make our product, we know how to sell our product, but what we don't, and we can train people to do that, but what we don't have the patience for, and what we don't have the patience for is to get these kids to learn to be respectful, to speak, to talk, to show up on time, to wear a uniform, to learn that life isn't always about winning and closing the deal, but you have to learn. These are things that you learn through sport. Communication. We were teaching young kids to communicate with each other. You have to do that in team sports. You have to show up on time, because if you don't show up on time, you're not going to get playing time. If you don't show up to practice or to the game, you're not going to get in. The same goes for work. Gender inclusion, including, all types of, social inclusion and learning how to work as a team, communicating. And then, the passion that they have of following a team. So we built this program, and we started telling these kids, we're going to teach you these life skills and teach you and prepare you for the workforce. And you're going to get practical training in whatever company you're going to get to choose from. But in order to play the game and the sports and to compete, you're going to have to, you know, learn and do your homework. You're going to have to show up on time. You're going to have to do these things. So we had to sign up companies. We said, okay, we've got to prepare these young people for the workforce. We have this money from the public sector, from the governments. We have the authorization and the buy-in from the schools, which are, from the public sector as well. But we need the private sector, the public-private part, to help us, train and also give these young leaders jobs. So we went to Microsoft, and Microsoft said, sure, we could benefit from this. And what does Microsoft want at the end of the day? They want more Windows users, which is fine. They're a business, they're a for-profit. Nike came to us. Nike had a big marketing challenge because they were relatively new to Latin America, and they had to compete against Adidas, which was the former World Cup, and it still is, athletic apparel. The Nike said, well, we would like to give you $5.6 million to train young girls in Brazil. We're interested in Brazil. We want to focus there first. And we want to incorporate young girls into this. We want gender inclusion. So Nike came on board. This is a funny story. Coca-Cola is the official partner of FIFA. My hair used to be Atiba's hair color before I started to work with FIFA. Now it's all gray because of the challenges of working with an organization like that. But FIFA was working, and their soft drink is Coca-Cola. But we had this big contract with Pepsi-Cola. So, we had the CEO of Coca-Cola and the CEO of Pepsi-Cola come to the bank, to meet, and the bank's not official, but the bank's catering department, our cafeteria had a contract with Coca-Cola. But we had the CEO of Pepsi-Cola coming. So I sent interns rushing to the store next door to buy some Pepsi-Cola to give them the choice. But PepsiCo and Coca-Cola came on board and said, okay, we have, we need 10,000 jobs filled for this pilot, and we're going to, give you some resources to do that. Of course, they want to sell product and they want to get involved in this somehow. Colgate, we wanted to put, to do health projects. Colgate came on board. Visa, we brought them in as the credit card company. And, what we wanted Visa to do was teach these young leaders financial literacy. And we were doing this. This was a really interesting anecdote, and of course, Visa wants more Visa card holders. I mean, that's their business. That's their business. But, we brought them in, and Visa said, because of the Olympics are coming to Rio and we're doing this pilot in Rio, we'd like to bring Michael Phelps into the mix. We want to bring Michael in. Michael will be a nice attraction, and he wants to get involved, and he's a spokesperson for us. So he's willing to give the kids swimming lessons. Well, the fact of the matter is, we were working in a favela, which a favela is a poor neighborhood, a poor town. They didn't have a swimming pool. So we had to like put in resources, and we had to figure out a way to build a swimming pool to give to the community for weeks, so Michael Phelps can go in and jump in and teach the kids how to swim. So there's a lot of challenges because there's a lot of personalities. There's a lot of key KPIs, which are the key performance indicators, and the indicators and the outcomes that companies want aren't always necessarily the same as what governments want. But we were very happy that we were finding that young people were getting engaged, were getting involved because of the sports piece. Because one of the things we also learned through the importance of sports and this public-private partnership is the caring adult element. And I'm generalizing a lot, but in a lot of these communities that we were working with in a lot of these countries, these kids didn't have a caring adult in their life. They didn't know their parents, or perhaps both parents were working, or they were being raised by their grandparents. So they didn't have a parent role model. They weren't at school, so they didn't have a school or a teacher. They weren't going to church, so they didn't have a priest, or they weren't going to a mosque or to a synagogue, so they didn't have that. And so the coach, the sports coach, becomes that caring adult, and we found that that's so important, such an important sounding board. So to make a long story short, we piloted this program, this public-private partnership, in 3 countries: Brazil, Ecuador, and Uruguay. And it had, such an impact that it's now in 26 countries. And it became a pilot project with grant resources. Grant resources is money that you don't have to give back. It's free money, but we're a bank. So what we wanted to do was test this out. So the countries who are our clients would say, "Hey, we want to buy in on this. We want to borrow $20 million for a pilot project, and to bring this to all the schools in Bogota. We want to bring in $2.5 billion to bring this to all the schools in Argentina." And that was something that it's become something that's grown, and it's become a field in itself, which is the sports for development field, or the sports for philanthropic field. And it was an interesting thing. And then we also learned that there were a lot of kids that weren't didn't like sports. So we did a really interesting partnership with MTV. I know MTV is not cool now, but in the 90s, MTV was pretty cool and pretty innovative. So a lot of kids through culture and music, and we got, you know, Bad Bunny, and Shakira, and Juanes, and bringing in different musicians and different artists and actors to become the spokesperson for these things and train young kids in music. So it's finding the interest of the company and what they're good at doing with the interest and the necessity of these communities. So that's the challenge, is putting them all together.
So I'm going to let the students come up and ask the questions. So I think the first one was by Becca. She had the first question. So Becca,
Sure.
can you ask your question?
Yep. Um, so our team question was, as college students transition into the workforce, what will be their most difficult challenges for implementing social change?
Okay, that's a really good question. What is going to be your biggest challenge? Your biggest challenge is going to be getting the buy-in, and making it, getting the buy-in from your supervisors, and making sure that you're not working in silos and that you're working together as a team. And because the challenges in doing social impact, especially now, which is very difficult because the economy is not doing so great, resources are limited. So finding those champions, and a lot of them are coming from you guys, from the students who are from the younger generations, that are identifying the right fit. What's the right problem that we can address, and that what can we do to be as effective and as efficient as possible to address these social challenges. So a big challenge, Becca, is you guys have to coming to an agreement, as because there's so many problems and there's so many social challenges, whether it's health, education, employment, combating, technology, using it in a responsible and in a good way. So finding, that common ground and making it a fit that's corporate and that works for your company. I think that's a really big thing, is to get the buy-in from everybody, and hopefully the buy-in comes in from the top. And then another challenge is that a lot of companies tell us is that we're working with mid-level staff, and they're not necessarily getting. They're told by their CEO, or they're told by their CFO or their CMO, by the C-suite, we need to come up with a program for this, but you can only use this amount of money, and you can only use this amount of time, because we can't have you dedicated. So another big challenge young people have is that buy-in from the company, which, to tell them it's, this is a really good social investment. This is something that's very important. I don't know if that makes sense.
That was good. Thank you. I think we have Ethan. What's next? I think it's Ethan. Yes,
Um,
Ethan. Mhm.
yeah, you already kind of touched on this, but I was just wondering, what is your best advice if you had to just give one piece for dealing with really difficult stakeholders if they have high influence?
The best advice, if they have high influence, the best advice I could give is, hold on, give me 1 second. Someone's trying to, the best advice I could give is to listen, because a lot of times the people aren't listening, and it sounds silly, but if you're not listening, you don't have that communication piece, you're going to get lost in this. So listening and having an open line of communication, and making sure all the stakeholders have a seat at the table. I know that's difficult, because and you guys are probably learning this in your class, the difference between shareholders and stakeholders, and how shareholders are also stakeholders, but stakeholders are much more than just the shareholders, to making, and convincing everybody. So listening, and make sure that you're really committed to doing this, because another thing that's very important is, you can't people are smart, consumers are smart, the citizens are smart, and they don't want to, you don't want to come in as a company and parachute down and build something that you're not going to address later on, or keep it sustainable. So sustainability is another thing that's really important.
Thank you.
Of course. We still have questions, Atiba, or do you want me to?
I think group 8 has their next question.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll ask for group 8.
Hi,
Um,
Group.
when transitioning from a pilot project to a large scale market model, what is the most common hurdle that kind of prevents partnerships from being sustainable in the long run?
People. That's one of the biggest challenges I've had, is that there's a lot of turnover, and to make it sustainable, you have to have it be consistent. And unfortunately, and that's, people change. They change their job, they leave to go to another job. So that's a big challenge, is because sometimes you're doing this great project with, I'll give you a really good example. We were working with a chief marketing officer for global Coca-Cola, and he was brilliant, and he had all these great ideas, and he wanted to implement these things. And sustainable means keeping it going, and making it sure that it's not a fly by night thing, and that it's something that has legs and grows. And what he did was, one of the mistakes that he made was, he was so committed to this personally, that he didn't bring it down to his team. So he had a lot of it in his brain, and he had a lot of power, because he was the chief marketing officer for all of Coca-Cola. But he left, and you can't blame him, because it's a private company, and he got an offer he couldn't refuse, or he wanted to. Some people retire, some people change, some people get fired, some people go on to another job. But that's one of the biggest challenges to keep things sustainable. I think is the people, having the right people, because if you just leave and you don't train the next person to what that person should be doing, then you're going to have a problem. And that next person might come in and have a totally different idea or objective, or different way to do it. So that's one of the stumbling blocks that we had. And it goes both ways in a public-private partnership, because you're from the private companies, it's the employees. From the governments, we're working with at the World Bank and at the Inter-American Development Bank with democratic governments. So there's change. Change is a good thing. But a new government will come in with new players that have new priorities and they have new, ideas, and so that change, turnover. I mean, that's a big problem and a big challenge to overcome.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Somebody was knocking at the door. I'm in my office. But now we have group 9. They have a question. It's group 9.
Professor, can you hear me?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Our question is the process of finding partners different for social entrepreneurship and business entrepreneurship?
There is a big difference, and I think one of the things that has really changed is that younger people, and it's easier now than it was before. Because when I got into this business in the early 90s, social entrepreneurship was a new thing. Entrepreneurs were, you know, there's something that to be said that you can do good for the company and the bottom line and do good for yourself financially and do good for the world and do good for your stakeholders and your the people that are buying your customers and your clients. And I think that changed over time. Is the way it's looked at. Corporate social responsibility in the past, and I'm generalizing, but I worked with a lot of companies in the very beginning of this, that it was passed on to the public relations team or the whoever wanted it. It wasn't, something strategic. Now there are entire people dedicated to this, and it's become a profession. And even in business schools, which is really fascinating, is a lot of students choose which business school they'd like to go to depending on if they have these type of programs where you can learn about social entrepreneurship or social sustainability strategies. So I think it's a progression of time that has changed these things, and attitude. Attitudes are changed, and obviously education. This class, perhaps, this component, or you wouldn't have me coming and teaching this to a business class, perhaps 10 years ago.
Thank you. Gavin, I think you're next. Group 7.
Yeah.
So,
Hold on, I'll try to find it. Oh, my question was how do you make people into leaders to ensure that it benefits the shareholders and the company overall? I think like not I'm in a position in an organization like where I am in a leadership role, and like it's just kind of hard to like figure out how to make somebody a leader that doesn't feel like they are.
Well, that's a really good question, Gavin. And some leaders are, and there's always that big debate: is are you a natural born leader, or can you learn to become a leader? And I think I lean towards more that you learn to become a leader. And I think everybody has that, or most people have that passion in them. And I bring that word passion because one of the things that you need to do is you need that buy-in. If you want to become a leader, you need to believe, and you have to believe in what you're championing. Is to start with something that you're passionate about and that you wake up every day and wanting to do it and wanting to share it. One of the things that I keep dear to my heart, one of the lessons I learned from one of my mentors who was a big leader when I started, because you have to start somewhere. He told me, Fabian, send the elevator back down. When you're going up and you're rising up in your career, send that elevator back down so other people can come up that elevator. Because you never know who's gonna become not just your employee, but rather than your colleague and then your boss. So be respectful to everybody, and be open to learning and to new ideas. Because some leaders you can tell off the bat if they're there because they have to be there or they're there because they want to be there. And I think that want to be is important. If you want to be a leader, and Gavin, I think you have probably those leadership skills because you have to be thinking about that as well. Because not everybody perhaps wants to be a leader, but so it's there's a lot of leadership training, there's a lot of leadership courses. You see that before didn't happen as much, and now a lot of companies call it professional development, and a lot of people see that as it's got to check the box, and I've got to do this requirement of 2 hours so I get this thing or I can get my next raise. And a lot of people are looking forward to that, to that type of training and learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so next question is group 10, Shimmer. So Fabian, what I did is I broke them into groups and so they each have projects. So that's why I'm calling out groups.
Awesome.
So, yeah. So group number 10.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, so back in 1994, we mentioned that connecting the years were fax machines. It was some visionary move fueled by the dividends of that era. But I think so in today's 2026, this information saturated era do you believe that we young people still can catalyze global change through such initiatives as effective as they did in the decades before?
That's a really great question. And I think technology's made things a lot more, a lot better and a lot easier and a lot more accessible. What I always say is, I did a lot of work in this whole digital divide thing between the rise of technologies. And I'll never forget something that I worked on a project that it was a public-private partnership, and Microsoft was involved. And I worked with Colin Powell when he was the Secretary of State, when he took on the Secretary of State role. And he said to me, he goes, you know what, Fabian? We've got a huge challenge because there's digital apartheid. That's the difference between the haves and the have-nots of technology and accessibility. And I think, technology has become something more accessible, and more, and you can reach these young people. And a really good prime example of this is even in the lowest development countries in South America during the COVID, during the pandemic, the schools were obviously closed, and especially in Latin America and the developing countries. So the students obviously the kids didn't have laptops or didn't have opportunities to learn online or to go to Zoom. But you know what? Most of them had a smartphone, because these smartphones, the communications companies, the Apples and the Googles and all these, they have such big penetration that they were learning through WhatsApp. WhatsApp became a huge tool for this. So I think that technology has helped a lot. It's also has its challenges, of course. In 1994, I mean, one of the things that I always talk to my students about, and I always tell them right off the bat, is that I'm a technology immigrant. I'm not a technology native like you guys. You guys are technology natives. It's innate. It's built in. In 1994, these young leaders didn't have the technology. They submitted essays handwritten. Now in high schools in the United States, you don't even learn handwriting anymore. I mean, so I think you have to be adaptable to change, and you have to bring in what I think is so important, and I think it's fundamental, is having these intergenerational dialogues. Talking to the older people, have the older people talk to the younger people. It's not just about experience that you have from, collecting years, but the experience that you have from gaining new ideas and, from young people and getting their thought process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have team 11, Alan.
Hi, Fabian.
Alan.
Yeah, we know many social impact projects succeed in pilot stages, but they might be struggle to scale. So based on your experience, what are the key factors that help social entrepreneurship solution to successfully scale to different regions or countries?
The biggest, and that's such an important question, and I'm glad you brought that up, talking about sustainability and how a pilot can sound neat, it could sound like the flavor of the day, but how do you build that into something that's, grows, and that first you have to show the results. The monitoring and the evaluation is so important, and to learn about that. There's a lot of people that it's innate and it's natural for them. They're research minded, they're math minded, but a lot of people don't understand the importance of monitoring and evaluation. And that takes a lot of resources. So you have to budget that into your project, and it takes a lot of time. So a lot of companies, they want to see the results today. That's one of the biggest challenges. They want to say, okay, that's fine. We did the pilot, that it worked. Okay, now what's going to happen? But we don't know unless we do take the time and we evaluate what we've monitored to see what are the results. What, how is that, how is that come into play? And it's not sexy. Monitoring and evaluation, when you talk about that component, it's not as fun as working in the innovation or the marketing or the sales. So it's, getting that monitor, getting those key performance indicators, those KPIs, which are so important. And, showing the results, that you have them on paper. You say, here's the study. We've, we've, we've invested $2 million to train 50 people, and we followed them and we monitored them and we researched on them. And this is what they were before the program. This is where they were during the program. And this is how they're succeeding after the program.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, team 2.
Okay, hello, Professor. Our question is that you mentioned the importance of the partnerships, and so could you share some stories from your career where a project faced an unexpected ethical or cultural challenge and how you solve it?
That's a huge and important question. And the ethical and cultural issues, I teach business ethics, but by the way, that's one of the courses I teach. And the cultural part is so important. And you have to have that understanding and that sensitivity from the very beginning. And you have to have what I call it's always effective. If you're working on a project from Brazil and you have a team from, if you have a 20-person team coming and 20 people come from Kansas and Missouri, they might be the top people and they might know their business and how to make the widget. But I would always recommend, to bring in some local talent, so they can tell you firsthand, this is how things are done. Another example that we've come across a lot of big challenges is that not only is it culturally different, but laws are different. Policies are different. Policies change in the way what's called the cost of doing business. So hiring local people not just only helps stimulate the local economy and that national economy, but it also is advantageous so you know how it works. Because the world's getting a lot smaller, and it's very challenging. I mean, it's challenging for professors too, because when we're teaching about global business and global enterprise, you know, what tariff can happen today might change tomorrow, or what importation can happen, or if there could be a war going on where shipping is affected, the supply chain is affected. So culture is extremely important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, now team 3.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is about our project. You just mentioned that you got this celebrity partnership of working in the Brazil, like with the Michael Philippus. And actually, our project is also in Brazil. We aim to improve the young girls' education in Brazil. I wonder if it will take a fight if we get a partnership with these famous people to improve the education in Brazil. Yeah.
It's an education project.
Yeah.
So I think you want to get in the buy-in and have all the partners contribute from the very beginning, and have them realize what are the issues and the challenges for the stakeholders in the community, the clients that you're working for, who are your customers or your clients. I think the cultural component goes into that as well, because they might have some different ideas. So if you're working with a public and private, investors or partners, you want to get that going from the very beginning, that understanding from what your objectives are to what success mean to you. How many kids finish the program? How many adults finish the program? How many people went through the whole program? How many left the program? How many graduated from the program? And how many are actually benefiting from the program? Again, going into monitoring and evaluating that. I think that's super important.
Okay. Got it. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, so next group is the FIFA question, football. Sisan Shong.
Yeah,
Thank you.
uh, since I'm a football fan and I know that FIFA and football can create excitement very quickly, so how do your organization make sure that excitement turns into the long-term educational impact rather than just short-term participation?
That's a great question. And what we do when I work specifically with FIFA, I work with an entire team that they have dedicated to this. So you have to have, the right counterpart, the right person who's going to monitor and follow through with this because you're right, it's very exciting, it's very fast, it's very now. The game starts and then the game ends. But then what's next? So how are you going to use that energy and that positivity and that impact that you have for good. So FIFA has an entire team, and this is very interesting because this World Cup that's coming up this year is in 3 countries. So it's very challenging because you have the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and they have, so they have 3 different governments, they have 3 different rules, they have 3 different cultures, they have so what they've done very smartly and very wisely, which is also very challenging, is they've decentralized. So in other words, when it was one country, you had a host committee, which was the national host committee, which worked directly with FIFA and with the corporate partners. But now it's you have so many different cities and so many different countries that it's become decentralized. So there's the Miami host committee, the Guadalajara host committee, the Toronto host committee. So you have to work with the local people and the right people. And again, CSUN, the communication is super important. Meeting regularly. And that's hard because that takes away time from your schedule and that takes away time from other things that you have to do. But I think communication is key and making sure that they're being followed through because a lot of people change, and if they change, then the new coach might have a different thing, and you're working with different countries, so you have different confederations, which is also a challenge. The Jamaican Confederation of Football might have a different thing than CONMEBOL, and CONMEBOL might have a different idea than UEFA, and UEFA might have a different idea from CONCACAF. So it's a I call it a salad of all these different vegetables and things, and you've got to make sure that it's uniform and that that so in other words mixed up well so it tastes good.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so are there any other questions from groups or any just questions about your project? Maybe you want to get some feedback on your idea. This is the time to ask your question before we're going to try to finish up at 3:30. I know we ended late last time, but we're going to try to finish up at 3:30. So any questions that you may have, this is your chance to ask an expert in the field, whether, about your idea, if you want to share your idea.
How big are the teams?
Some of them are groups of 3 to some 5, and they had to pick developing country, and then they have to use AI to help
Okay,
solve the problem, and then create a for-profit entity to raise money to fund it.
great project.
Any questions? All right, so I have a question. Um, I haven't explained to them the difference between shareholders and stakeholders, but maybe you can explain the difference between shareholders and stakeholders for them.
Sure, sure. There was a whole philosophy. Shareholders are representatives who benefit, they work for the benefit of the company, and they have perhaps the company's a public company where they have stock in the company, they have shares, and those shares represent a number. So the shareholders meet generally 4 times a year if it's a publicly traded company, and they vote on certain things. So what the companies that are making products, like the big giant companies that are traded publicly in the stock exchanges, they have to think about their clients, what the clients and the customers want, but they also have to keep in the back of their mind the shareholders, because the shareholders have to be happy, because that'll keep that's depending on how the stock is doing and what the company's worth. So it's very challenging because you have to always have that in mind, is keeping the shareholders involved and keeping them, and that's the job of the CEOs, because they can, in the C-suite, the leaders can be replaced or changed due to, the shareholders' activity. Now, shareholders are also stakeholders. It's a wide group of organizations and people. Stakeholders are the community. They're not just the customers, but they have the customers and the clients, but also the community at large. If you're building a factory and you're coming into a new town, if it's a small town, you have to make sure that the community is okay with you bringing in 3,000 new people that are going to require 3,000 new houses, that require 3,000 new students, that are going to require, it's going to change your energy grid. So you have the community as your shareholders. The stakeholders is the customers, the clients, the community, and all the people that are involved at large. And because one of the things that has changed in AI is that has a big role in this, and communications is the speed that information is exchanged and shared. It happens so fast. So you have all these different people in the mix that you have to keep, not just happy, but informed as well.
In this class, we've been talking about AI a lot and how to use it for impact. Have you seen like a big shift in companies like using AI for impact? And then also, it seems like, do you feel like it's going to speed up, maybe even to help us to solve problems bigger than what we were able to do before?
That's a great question, and I think the jury is still out.
Yeah.
I think it's so new, and I think I don't want to cop out, but I think it's both. I think it's going to be obviously very helpful, but I think it's also going to be very challenging because AI is replacing a lot of positions. So I think that there's a lot of adjustment that needs to be done. And it's an interesting question because I was talking to a friend of mine whose business is zooming. It's growing so fast. He's in the data center business. And the data centers are these big giant centers that house all the power to power AI, to power the technology. And so they need so much power now that they're looking at using different, they're looking at using nuclear energy to power these data centers. They're looking at all types of resources. You need new water to do these things. You know, I, it's such a challenge because my students, you know, AI, we encourage the use of AI to support you, to help you, but not to be the end all, for these things. Because AI makes mistakes as well. Because the AI is learning constantly.
Yes.
It's people are worried. I mean, it's affecting the companies at a much faster rate. The jobs report just came out recently, and it's been okay. But there's been a lot of people that their jobs are being affected, or by AI, and it's here. I mean, it's here to stay, and it's changing. Not even every day, but every second.
Yes. So fast. Yes, it is. Any other questions? So I guess before we close out, is there anything that you can say to the students about? So this is a social impact class, and their goal is really to create a project, well, really an idea that's going to that's going to benefit the lives of somebody that's suffering. So you've been in the field for so long. Can you talk about the positive side, like what it feels like when you have a successful project and just the feeling of like for what you did with the boys in my organization, Truth, you gave them computers and you had donate computers and their little faces smiling because they know that they're a challenging group. That
You know,
they
there,
deserve. Yeah.
there's nothing like that. And I always tell this story from what happened to me and what I lived. One of my big clients, one of the biggest projects I worked on is Luxottica. And they have an NGO, a non-for-profit called One Sight. One of the things I learned is that 1 out of every 7 people have vision impairment. So that means that, there are millions and millions and millions of children and people that are being misdiagnosed as learning disabled, when the fact of the matter is they can't see. They just can't see the teacher, or they can't see the blackboard or the whiteboard. So one of the first things that impacted me was they said, when I first met them, they said, Fabian, we have a present for you. I said, a present? That's so weird. I mean, that's so unusual. So they gave me a beautiful pair of glasses. And I'm thinking, how do they even know I wear glasses? This is ridiculous. So I was very polite and I said, thank you very much. And I put them in my coat pocket. And they said, no, 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 no. Fabian, please put them on. Put them on now. And I'm like, this is so weird. So I put on the glasses. And if I tell you guys, I couldn't see a thing. It was it was so blurry. And then they said, Fabian, that's how 1 out of every 7 human beings on this planet see. They can't. So one of the things that made me cry with joy was I was on a trip with them to Brazil and the Amazon, the most remote areas. They were working with communities that have never been seen glasses or so forth and so on. And I saw a young mother with her 7-year-old child, and we diagnosed and with the technology that they have, and we got this woman, this young mom, glasses, for the first time in her life. And when she turned around and she saw her daughter, she looked at me and she said, Mister, this is the first time, daughter. This is the first time I can see what she looks like, what she feels like. I mean, that for me is worth, there's no big bonus that you can get from, selling something or doing something. I think social impact is so important. And I admire you guys and I admire your professor for bringing this on and teaching this, because it's something that's, it's good for business and it's good for your heart. It's good for the world. And, and another thing that I've learned is, that really affected me is that, we call it service, service. But unfortunately, a young person came to me and he said, I see this at first I didn't understand it. And I saw it almost as a sentence, like a punishment. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, my family, my friends, when we got in trouble, we'd get probation and we'd have to do community service as a punishment. And it's and I it's a mind change, because service isn't a punishment. Service is about serving, about by being a good citizen.
Tell them what the motto is for the school. Can we put it in the chat? What is the motto for the school? What's our motto? Everybody should know the motto for Virginia Tech. What is it? Yes. Yes. That I may serve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And one of the things I'd like to leave you guys also with is, I know that it's so fast, and we're talking about a subject matter that could be an entire course in itself, which it is, and I have to bring it in 1 hour. One of the tools that I always tell my students to really take advantage of talking about technology is LinkedIn. If you guys are on LinkedIn, reach out to me. If you have a question afterwards, I'm more than happy to say. You could say, I was in Miss Whitaker's class and I didn't have the opportunity to, or I've thought about this afterwards. I'm more than happy to stay in touch with everybody and and address those issues or those challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give them, if everybody could turn their cameras on and let's turn your mute button off, and let's just say thank you. Everybody can say thank you and just give him appreciation for his wisdom and coming here for an hour to share.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for that, Alan, that wave. Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
well, I'll see you a little later.
Yes, I will see you at 5:30.
All right. Great to see everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.